All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the May 18th Agent Sandbox meeting. I'm your host today, Janet. We have a few announcements and discussion topics. The first one is that we just released the 0.4.6 release. We also introduced a breaking change too, so please be mindful of that. And basically, we are making the service creation be optional. This is mostly for scalability because in some use cases, the service is not needed and it impose some scalability limitation to the cluster. So we allow people to opt out of that feature and we change it to be default off. So instead of creating a Atlas service by default, we no longer do that. And then we also add some changes to the Python SDK to support that change because we need to support the use cases when the service no longer is available. And then we also add some additional features that you can look at the release notes to see more detail. And I'm also going to post the meeting agenda in the chat so that people can follow the link there. Now back to the discussion topic. We want to talk about the graduation of the alpha API to beta. And then I've linked to this ticket for that discussion. And we have a few changes that we want. And one of them is the service making it opt-in. We already make that change, and we also have a few other changes that we want to make. We can discuss that here today. And so the first one is also on something that's mentioned above, which is about the suspension and resume feature that we are designing right now. So we originally have a spec.replicas field in Sandbox. And that field allows you to set it to reroll to pause the Sandbox and set it to 1 to resume that. And we are thinking about changing that API to something that's more sophisticated than just either 0 or 1, but allowing more things like being able to specify different suspension policies and, and being able to do things like maybe we want to do soft suspension instead of killing the pod. We can just scale the resource down. And then there's also some ideas about integration with things that might also suspend a resource. Maybe we want to introduce some gates for different controller to put suspension on it. And does anyone have any more comments about this?
Is there a document specifying the comparison between spec replicas or a suspend resume field? Because I assume there are some pros and cons for each.
Yes, and we have a cap for suspend resume. Let me find.
Oh, oh, I linked it to your chat in the chat.
Oh, nice. So basically, we have a proposal here for what it looks like.
Thank you. I'll go over it.
So basically, this this will be a new field for suspension, and I think we might not be using a boolean, but basically the idea is that we have a field for suspending, and then on a paired field for specifying the strategy for suspension. So basically, users can set, I want to suspend this sandbox, and then put a policy behind that. And then we can pair that with some plugin that uh, that can connect with different providers for restoring from a saved state. So one example is that we can pair that with the snapshot plus API that will allow different platforms or cloud to plug in their underlying infrastructure for storing that state. And so please feel free to take a look at the cap that's linked in the chat. I also link it back to the agenda so that everyone can take a look and see that. So going back to the API beta. So, oh, Andre, you have a hand.
Yeah, sorry, I guess I just want to have a quick question for the suspend resume cap. I was checking some of those, design around suspend strategies and how you want to do checkpointing of the sandbox. Kind of like trying to understand, like I know there is ongoing effort in Kubernetes to enable checkpoint restore API and restore from there as well. So I guess my question is like on the sandbox, agent sandbox APIs directly, like are you planning to kind of support checkpointing right now in the controller itself? And maybe, explore how Kubernetes will push this feature to beta and GA and migrate, or you want to, use your own strategy to do checkpointing?
Yeah, so eventually you want to be aligned with the upstream. So right now, the major thing that affects the API going to beta would be the field for specifying the intent for suspension. So we might introduce other fields later when the upstream is more ready. So we have the integration in the client side right now. And we haven't done it in the API, mostly because um, we're still trying to see what's the upstream API going to look like.
And are you planning to kind of like, moving to J and beta, like to change the API or just support different providers? It could be something which, you integrate in the controller itself or use just upstream version of API to do checkpointing.
I
Um,
think it depends on what the upstream really look like, but we don't want to put too much on specific implementation in the agent sandbox controller. So we will do introduce an interface and have some way to connect to the upstream and to different provider so that we only implement a slim layer between agent sandbox in the other controller so that most of the logic happens there.
that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, so for this one, the discussion will happen in the CAP, but mostly we'll start with that single field for specifying the intent of suspension, and other fields we are going to introduce them likely after we graduate the API to beta.
Should we separate the removal of replicas and the suspension requirement? Can we say we're moving away from replicas to indicate that, snapshotting, to just suspend the pod, and snapshotting is beyond the scope of this change?
Yeah, snapshotting will be a separate change that will be a follow-up, because that's not really breaking, and we can introduce that later after we graduate things to beta.
Yeah, just to add on Janet's point, like the main cap is like an overall discussion, and I've created a PR just for the spec.replicas to spec.mode or whatever, like the execution mode, however we want to name it, separately, just for graduation of the API.
Then the next one is I think this one is pretty straightforward. Basically, the TLDR is that we have two fields in a agent sandbox claim spec for specifying sandbox template and wormhole. And let me show you the types.go. So basically, you can both specify the template and the wormhole, and they might be conflicting. So we need to change that to make them mutually exclusive, so that you specify either of them, but not both. That will be a little bit breaking, but I don't expect it to affect many users, because it's supposed to be used this way. And then the next change is about all the constant value from the wormhole policy. Currently, we used value like none and default, but not capitalized, and they should be capitalized. That will be a breaking change as well, but I don't expect that to be too disruptive. But potentially we can make the controller respect both values, but we document the capitalized one, so it doesn't break anyone, but complies to the convention. And any more comments about this one? I expect it to be pretty straightforward. So moving on to the rest, that needs a little bit more discussion. So one of the suggestion is so basically in the sandbox status, we have a label selector field, and we use a string for that field. So basically it's a literal string for key equals to value instead of the map. So there was a suggestion for changing that to a map, but I think that will break the HPA integration, because HPA requires status selector to be serialized. And then because it's in status, it's not really breaking. It's breaking us changing the field in the spec, but like I said, we probably won't be doing it anymore. And does anyone have comments about this one? And then the next one is about the wormhole has a replicas field in the spec. And it is currently in required field. And I think there's a suggestions for changing it to be optional with a default of 0 for HPA to manage that. But I think Shruti, you mentioned that another controller needs it to be at least 1.
The
Right.
HPA needs it to be the minimum number of replicas is it needs it to be 1. I think Jada works with like 0 replicas in the wormhole.
Yeah. So I think this one we might not need we might not be able to find the good default value, and if not, this might not be able to be changed to optional.
How does HPA scale up worm pools?
So HPA can look at the scale of sub resource, I think, for scaling up and down resources, and based on the resource usage of the worm pool. I think we have some metrics for people to integrate with the HPA.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
there's
Donner.
a Sandbox claims per minute or per second, and you can connect it to the HPA, and it will scale from minimum to maximum. You're
Okay,
correct.
so the metric is for claims and not for actual resource usage, so CPU memory and so on. Is that how it works?
Yes, that's correct. So you would want to replenish your worm pool according to the number of claims per unit of time. So for that
Thank you.
specific template.
So maybe let's move on to the next one. So this one is about the Automont service account token. So right now in the Sandbox template, we changed the default to false, but in the Sandbox we remain the current default of the pod, which is true. And there's a suggestion for changing the default in Sandbox to true as well, to false as well. But I'm worried that it might cause confusion because we are changing the behavior of the template, of the pod template, to make it different from other workloads APIs. And the Sandbox template is more like opinionated, so changing the default there, I think is fine, but changing the default in Sandbox, I have some concerns about causing confusion to users. But I wonder if anyone have comments about that, because it makes it more secure by default, even though it might be confusing because of the inconsistency.
Making a default security posture is good, in my opinion. I did remember Tim mentioning that this should have been the default in other controllers, but getting it through an annotation may be an acceptable compromise. So, like, we can, if the Sandbox has an annotation, and then we set these default security postures, something like that. We also do that in Warmpool, where we inject an automated network policy if nothing is sent, but it's gated by a flag, a config.
Yeah, changing changing that in the Sandbox template or Wormpool seems reasonable. but I think yeah, I think maybe introducing another annotation just for this setting seems a little bit overkill unless we have more setup that we can also combine with this one. But then we still have some other topics. Maybe we want to quickly go through them because we still have one more topic on the agenda. So the next one is about it's more aesthetic, in my opinion. Basically, the lifecycle object is not visible in the sandbox or clam spec because they are currently inline and embedded. So this is a proposal for making it flattened to be or structured to be cleaner. But I'm not sure if it's needed. And does anyone have strong opinions about inlines, like no inlines in Go API?
Which I don't think it affects the API, so you
Yeah,
can probably just do it. And but it's not. I don't think it's a beta blocker.
unless we want to change it to be structured, then it changes the API.
Fair. Yes. If we wanted to actually make it a true, structure, then a true API structure. Yes.
And the next one is a little bit more, needs more thoughts. This one is about adding a strict validation to the sandbox name to limit it to 63 characters. This is to make the service work, but I think given that we are making service optional, we shouldn't limit like the length of sandbox name if users wants to have a longer name of sandbox, and they don't need service, but maybe we can and we can also produce some warning or validation if users try to create a sandbox with a name longer than 63 characters, and they also enable the service. Yeah, yo.
Well, just my 2 cents here is like usually I think it's better to start with the limitation and maybe enhance it later than the opposite. Like unless we have like clear indication that people wants to be using a sandbox name with more than 63 characters.
I have a counterpoint. So sandboxes are typically created through Python SDKs, and though it's easy to do it there, but maybe because they do it programmatically, it's possible that it can be longer. And Kubernetes naming is, at least for pods, it's people don't have an expectation of limitation to 63, so that might be a surprise. Other than the element of surprise, I think it's okay to limit it. But I tend to agree with Janet that it might not be needed here. And if a service is enabled, then we can put a validation and error out the resource.
So in terms of API breaking, if we add the limitation now and relax it later, would that be considered non-breaking?
Yeah, it would not be a breaking change if you ease a limitation. Yeah, we've done
So
that.
basically, we could make this easier if we add the limitation now before we go.
What about existing deployments? If they have, existing installations that have longer names, what happens to them? It is breaking for them, right?
Yeah, but we want to make all the possible breaking changes before we graduate to beta. So we could have some breaking change if we need to.
Okay. Like, what would happen if you reconcile? You'll start erroring out, or you would delete the
Yeah,
pod. We just need to make a decision on that, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's also a discussion at the bottom for how we handle the V1 beta 1 transition.
Like to start easy, I think you could just do the delimitation, with kubebuilder validation, and then in this case, you would just, you would just not be able to apply if you have a bigger, a name that's bigger. So like if you put just like this kubebuilder validation on the CRD, right? For existing implementation, I think it depends how you graduate. I think you don't use the X prefix name, right? You have a Sandbox, and it's just V1 Alpha 1. So people who's going to upgrade to V1 Beta, and if they have something that's higher, then the controller is not going to be able to update this, right? But yeah, given that it's alpha, like if you guys do want to go this route, so it's better to break it now than later.
Yeah. And then maybe switch topic because the other three seems more trivial. Then we can discuss the V1 beta 1 transition strategy. So there are two proposals. One is that we do it the safe way, or we duplicate the API. Basically, the first proposal is that we keep both alpha and beta. We copy alpha to beta. We do all the changes we need there. We make sure they are run trippable, but there's some additional complexity around the conversion webhook and keeping two versions of API. And the other potential proposal is that we can choose to drop the alpha API and make all the breaking changes we need in beta. And if we do this, when users upgrade, they need to delete their existing alpha service, alpha object, and then they can use cascade equals to false when they do kubectl delete, so that the child resource will still be running, and then they can upgrade, apply the new beta CRD, apply the new CRs with beta schema, and the controller will adopt the existing service or pods or PVCs of those sandbox resources. So this avoids the need of the conversion webhook, but this is like more disruptive for users compared to the first option. I wonder if folks have make suggestions or preference or ideas about which one is better.
I mean, the webhook is certainly more customer friendly. I think I'd like to know if anyone actually is running Alpha 1 in production that would find, that isn't just going to, or is running Alpha 1 at a level where they wouldn't actually just delete them and recreate them anyway, right? Like if like we don't want to introduce all the maintenance burden and slow ourselves down with a conversion webhook if no one's gonna use it anyway, right?
Yeah. So maybe I can ask in the Slack channel and mailing group to see if there's any concern about that. And I do want to go through the last topic from Leo. You have time to present that.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly like conversational. I was trying to look into what Sandbox is gonna need in terms of security posture, that it's like networking security posture that it's like higher than the L4 constructs, which is like allow IPs or deny IPs. And I'm wondering like what's the best like from use cases perspective, like what is the best place to kind of start like for another context, we're kind of working on Kube agentic networking. It's another project on Kubernetes 6, and we've been starting with allow listing MCP methods and tools. So I know URLs is another one, but I there's ways to do URLs as well. But the intent of this discussion topic is to try and make sure how we make it super smooth for Sandbox users to just be able to specify these controls and get enforcement beyond the IP level. So if there's anyone who's using it or have opinions about what would be most useful to do, that's the time to mention that.
What do you think the integration will look like? Do you think there will the agent sandbox will be dependent of like a resource that maybe the agent gateway manages or controls, or would they be deployed separately by users, or will that be some like interface between these?
Yeah, it may. I mean, like I wanted to start with like kind of use cases and what would be more useful, but like the state of the current situation is that could be achieved, but obviously in a way that people need to kind of put together the puzzle together is like if you have a sandbox, you spin up the agentic networking controller, and you have something we call access policy, and you would be able to say specific allowed like attach like policies based on identities and say, oh, this is allowed listed to call these tools, or this sandbox even is not allowed listed to even do a tool list. Like we have a kind of a granular MCP native methods, and we're also like trying to add like more L7 attributes that's just beyond. As an example, I want just these tools, but when this header is present and stuff like that. But I think I'm gonna start joining the agent sandbox meetings more often, because I want to get this, people who are actually using it or people that implements it. I want to know what is going to be more smooth in terms of like, if the SDK is spinning the sandbox, maybe they don't want to just be dealing and spinning up a lot of other resources. So there's probably a chance to do a better integration and like based on the sandbox needs.
Do you mind presenting shortly what agentic sandbox networking brings to the table compared to a generic L7 policy? That'll give us a better idea of how the integration would look like.
Yeah, I mean, it's agentic networking, so it's like beyond sandbox. But the what it does is like, you have a it's not a whole lot beyond L7, but like it's a lot of awareness on the agentic protocols, right? Starting with MCP, but not limited to. So for a regular L7 deployment, which by the way does not exist today in Kubernetes, like you don't have any standardization for any L7 authorization policy in Kubernetes. But for regular L7 deployment, you'd be able to look at header path, like general L7 attributes. But within this project, like the implementation is anticipated to look at the body, and like if you have an MCP request, to look at the body, understand the MCP parameters, right? Like then similarly, you would be able to do some callouts. As an example, this is on the roadmap. Like for example, you want to explicitly understand that the prom is not containing this regex or stuff like that. So it's more on the governance around the specific agentic protocols. There's also going to be some A2A, but like we currently don't have any input of what A2A should look like in terms of governance. But this is the idea.
Yeah.
Like, I'm happy to present. I mean, we're out of time. That's why I'm not like voluntarily open my screen and presenting, because I believe people like want to drop to their other meetings. I'm happy to present the project on GitHub and some of the docs we did around that in the next meeting.
Yeah,
Sounds good. And meanwhile, maybe you can help create an issue in the agent sandbox repo so that we can also discuss their async.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll do that.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining today. Right.
Thank you.
Feel
Thank you.